Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Welcome. My name is Bill Federer, and I am the guest host for this episode of Truth and Liberty. And we're going to have fun. We're going to talk about a book that I put together called There Really Is a Santa Claus, The History of St. Nicholas and Christmas Holiday Traditions. I think you'll find this fascinating. St. Nicholas is the most popular Greek Orthodox saint. There's actually more Greek Orthodox churches named after Nicholas than anybody else. And so he is to the Greek Orthodox what St. Peter is to the Roman Catholics. He's sort of the founding father of the Greek Orthodox Church. So let's give some background to St. Nicholas. The early church. Now, the church was born into a one-world anti-Christian government, the Roman Empire. I don't know about you, but if I were going to start a movement, I'd give them a couple years. But no, immediately the church is persecuted. And there's 3 centuries of this persecution. And Jesus told them, you shall receive power. After that, the Holy Ghost has come upon you, and ye shall be witnesses unto me, both in Jerusalem and unto Judea and unto Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. And part of being a witness was also part of being a martyr. And so Christianity spread, and you had persecution of Christians being thrown to the lions. Nero started the persecutions. He would take Christians and wrap them in burlap, dip them in tar, and put them on poles in his garden called Nero's torches. And 11 of the 12 apostles were martyred. John was thrown in a pot of oil, and he miraculously survived. But for 3 centuries, this was the Christian experience. I went to school in Rome in college, spent a semester over there, been to the Colosseum many times. There were 10 major persecution of Christians, and they were killed. The government made it a crime for Christians to assemble. Could you imagine the government telling churches that you couldn't meet and people couldn't come to church? And so every time the Christians got together, they risked their lives. And they met in catacombs. What are catacombs? I've been through many of them. They're caves carved in the ground. And I remember one time going down this road outside of Vatican City, and the tour guide takes us to this little, almost like a drainage ditch type of gate, but he unlocks it, and it's rusty, and he opens it up, and it's like 4 feet high, and you have to stoop down, and you have to scoot back about 30 yards, and then it opens up into a room with some first century Christian graffiti with little passageways that go off and little niches. And so you had these major persecutions. Nero, Trajan, Septimus Severus, Decius, Valerian, but Diocletian. Diocletian was the worst. And this is the picture of Nero and his torches. And now, some emperors were worse than others. And as Christianity spread, in 260 AD, you had an emperor, Gallienus, and he temporarily suspended persecution of Christians. And so Christianity exploded even more with Christians in the military. And then there's Emperor Diocletian, 285 AD, and he loses some battles with Persia. And he asked his generals why. And the generals said, well, you've neglected worshiping the Roman gods. And so Diocletian orders all the military to return to worshiping the Roman gods. Well, the problem was there's a lot of Christians in the military, and they could not return to worshiping the Roman gods. So the Christians were purged from the military. Could you imagine a military purging the Christians and getting them out? Well, once Christians were out of the military, Diocletian decided to use the military to force the entire Roman Empire to return to worshiping the Roman gods. And they went province by province, arresting pastors. Could you imagine the government arresting pastors and closing their churches and burning the scriptures and killing their leaders and cutting out their tongues and boiling them alive? And Diocletian literally wanted to exterminate Christianity, like get rid of this movement. And so his was the worst persecution, and it was during this time that Nicholas lived. Now, Nicholas is the most popular Greek Orthodox saint, and he, again, is to the Greek Orthodox similar to what St. Peter is to the Roman Catholics. And the Christianity spread in that first century, and Nicholas was in a town called Patara, Asia Minor. Today, that's Turkey. All 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation were in Turkey. And so a movement was sweeping through Christianity at the time called monasticism. It was this idea that if you really become a Christian, you would give away your money and then go live in a cave as a monastery or join a monastery. And so, remember, Jesus had the rich young ruler come to him, and he said, "What must I do to be saved?" And he says, "Well, keep all the commandments." And he said, "Well, I've done all that from my youth." And Jesus turned to him and said, "One thing you lack, go and sell all that you have, give it to the poor, and come and follow me." And so it says the young ruler went away sad because he had many riches. Well, this movement of monasticism was taking that scripture literally, and you would have wealthy people that would get saved and they would give away all their money, and then they would come and follow Jesus. But their idea of following Jesus was to live in a cave or join a monastery. And so Nicholas, the story is, and there's lots of Greek Orthodox traditions about Nicholas. One is in the town of Patara. His parents were wealthy and elderly and died when a plague swept through town, and he inherited a lot of their money. And so once Nicholas became a Christian, he decided he was going to give away the money. But he wanted to do it anonymously because he wanted the credit to go to God and not to him. He didn't want everybody to say, "Oh, you're great, you're great." No, he wanted to do it secretly. So he would sneak into town and throw money in the window of poor people at nighttime. So nobody would know that it would be him, and they would give the glory only to God. And so one story that became popular was a merchant in the town of Patara had gone bankrupt. And the creditors were coming not just to take his business and his house, they were going to take his children. And this merchant had 3 beautiful daughters. He knew if they were taken, it would probably be a life of prostitution or slavery or sex trafficking or something terrible. But the father had an idea. He thought if he could hurry up and marry his daughters off, the creditors couldn't take them. But the problem was he did not have money for a dowry, which was needed in that area of the world for a legally recognized wedding. Nicholas hears the problem. Late one night, he sneaks into the city and throws some money, some gold, in the window of this merchant. It may have landed in a shoe or a stocking that was drying by the fireplace. The oldest daughter was able to get married. She had a dowry. It was a big buzz, talk of the town. And then he throws money in the window, and the second daughter has a dowry, and she's able to get married. And again, it's a big buzz, talk of the town, right? And now by the time it's the third daughter, the father's expecting it. And he's waiting up, and he's waiting for Nicholas to throw the money in. And he runs outside and catches Nicholas. And Nicholas didn't want to be found out. And so Nicholas tells the man to make a promise not to tell who gave the money. And so that was the origin of the tradition of secret gift giving on the anniversary of Nicholas's death, which was December 6th, 383 AD. And so 343 AD. And so you have this tradition that started of hanging stockings by the fire and shoes and them being filled, again, on the anniversary of his death, December 6, 343 AD. There's even a church with a stained glass window of Nicholas throwing money in the window and the three daughters picking it up. And underneath of the stained glass, it has, he provides a dowry for 3 girls. And so as a result of this, Nicholas is often pictured as a saint, as a bishop, with 3 gold balls to symbolize those 3 bags of gold that he threw in the window of this poor family. And as a result of that, he became the patron saint of pawnbrokers. I know that's a stretch, but it's true. And so pawnbrokers will have 3 gold balls hanging outside of their pawnbroker shop to symbolize the 3 bags of gold that Nicholas threw in the window. And the pawnbrokers say, well, we're helping families out in their time of financial need, right? You don't have money, you can come down and pawn something and we'll give you money. And it's like, that's a little bit of a stretch, but whatever. And so now that Nicholas gave away all his money, he went to the Holy Land. Near Jerusalem was a monastery of Zion, and the people that were joining it would take vows of poverty, and they would take vows of silence. You would literally vow not to talk for the rest of your life. You would just enjoy your personal relationship with God. And the story is that right before Nicholas took his vows, somehow the Lord told him not to hide his light under a bushel. And so instead of it being a separation of church and state type of thing, where the church is just going to withdraw, we're just going to hide, we're just going to enjoy our own relationship, he was sent back. And so he gets on a ship, he goes back to Asia Minor, again today that's Turkey, and he gets off at a big city called Myra. And there's ruins of Myra there to this day. And the story goes on that the bishop of Myra had died, and the church leaders could not decide who their next bishop was going to be. And one of them has a dream that the first person to church the next day would be named Nicholas, and he was to be their next bishop. Now, Nicholas's habit was to fast all night and not eat until after church. That's when he would break the fast. Matter of fact, it was a pious practice among Christians to go to church and then break the fast. And so it got called break fast or breakfast, right? And so Nicholas shows up at church. He's the first one there. And they tell him, you're supposed to be the bishop, right? They ask his name. And when he says Nicholas, they tell him. And now, he was not too thrilled with the idea because the Roman Emperor Diocletian, remember him? He was arresting bishops and killing them. So it was sort of like, you be the bishop. No, I insist, you first. No, really, you be the bishop, right? And so he finally agrees, he becomes the bishop, and he's arrested. And the Roman Emperor, who is killing bishops, right, puts him in jail. And so Nicholas is seen in several artworks as being chained in jail. And meanwhile, while Nicholas of Myra is in jail, the Emperor Diocletian, he's struck with an intestinal disease so painful that he abdicates the throne on May 1st, 305 AD. This was a big deal. The Roman emperors by this time had been declaring themselves a god with a little g, sprinkling gold dust in their hair and demanding that their image be worshipped. And so this was sort of like a god resigning. And so Diocletian resigns. He goes to the other side of the Adriatic, around where Croatia is. He builds a palace and goes into agriculture. And then the next emperor is Galerius. He continues the persecution of Christians. He's struck with an intestinal disease and dies. Must have been something in the water there in Rome. And in Rome, if there wasn't a replacement emperor, like a vice president, standing in line, it was a toss-up amongst the most powerful generals. and there's 4 generals, and they each claim to be the next emperor, and if you don't like it, come and fight. And so they fight. 2 are quickly defeated, and it comes down to Constantine and Maxentius. Now, Constantine is a Roman general stationed in York, England, and when word comes that Galerius had died, his soldiers surround him, and they say, "Hail Caesar." It's like, okay, we're behind you. You be the next Caesar. We're with you. And the soldiers didn't pledge allegiance to the flag or to the Constitution. They pledged allegiance to their general. They would go to death if their general ordered them to. There was an extreme loyalty there. And so Constantine, with his army, marches toward Rome. And in Rome is Maxentius. Now, if Maxentius would have stayed in the city, there's a chance he could have survived, but he decides he wants to go out and fight, and it's called the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD. And the story is Constantine saw the sign of Christ in the sky the day before the battle. And he puts this sign on all of his shields and symbols and wins the battle. And so what is the sign? The common understanding is it was the first 2 letters of the Greek name for Christ. So Greeks would abbreviate names with the first 2 letters. Sort of like we abbreviate states, right? Where the first 2 letters, like Colorado, is C-O. And so the Hebrew word is Messiah, the anointed one. Well, if you translate that into Greek, the word is Christ or Christus. And the letter that makes the K sound in Greek is written as an X. It's called Chi. And the letter that makes the sound is written as a P, and it's called Rho. So the first 2 letters of the Greek name for Christ, the X and the P, they're called the Chi Rho. And Constantine supposedly heard the words, in hoc signo vinces, in this sign you'll be invincible. And so that's often abbreviated IHSV. So in the 4th century, you had Constantine and the Roman artwork. It's Christian, and you'll often see a big X and a P, the Chi Rho, and underneath the letters IHSV, in hoc signo vinces, in this sign you'll be invincible. And so that over the centuries, the Chi Rho got shortened just to the Chi, the X, and it was called the Christ's cross or crisscross. And so that's where you get Xmas. X is not crossing out the name of Christ. X is the Greek letter that stood for Christ. It was the Christ cross, right? So Xmas meant Christ Mass. And then it came down as an oath where you swear on a Bible, tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. Well, if you're going to swear an oath, you would cross your heart. You would make the Chi, the X. Swear to tell the truth, cross my heart. And then it became a written oath where if you're going to swear on a document, you would sign at the Christ cross. You would sign at the X, right? And then they would kiss it to show sincerity, and that's come down to us as the X's and the O's on the bottom of a Valentine. That you're swearing to keep your pledge before Christ to this person, and you're kissing it to show sincerity. Anyway, back to Constantine. He saw the Chi Rho, he put it on all of his shields and symbols. He wins the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. The next year, 313, he issues the Edict of Milan, officially ending the persecution of Christians. And so during this time, Nicholas is let out of jail. And since it's okay to be a Christian minister, he's preaching publicly against paganism. What were the pagan practices? Human sacrifice, infant exposure, divination. And divination is where they would cut open an animal and look at its gizzards and try to predict the future. The Romans actually had whole courses in how to interpret a liver. I mean, it was really pagan. But what's the exposure? Well, before I get to that, first we have to talk about him being a fire and brimstone preacher. So Nicholas preached against sexual immorality. And nearby to Myra is Ephesus and the temple to Diana. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. This enormous temple, 127 huge pillars, and temple prostitutes. It was the Las Vegas of the Mediterranean. It was a sinful place. This temple to Diana at Ephesus. Matter of fact, the Apostle Paul preached there. in Acts 19. And all the pagans, Greeks got together and they chanted for 2 hours, "Great is Diana, the goddess of the Ephesians." And Paul said, "Let me go out and talk to them." And they go, "No, these people are crazy. They'll kill you." And they rush him out of town. And so this image to Diana is this little pagan image that they thought had fallen from heaven. But you had all these people in the area that were making these images and selling them. And when Christianity was going through, people weren't buying them anymore and they were going out of business. Well, Nicholas preaches against Diana worship, and they tear the temple, the local temple, down. And then a few years later, they tear the big temple down at Ephesus. And so Nicholas would have been a fire and brimstone preacher, preaching against sexual immorality. He would not have been for all the woke stuff. Now, the Greeks were into immorality. They were into naked statues. Matter of fact, the word gymnasium, gym is the Greek word for naked. And they would exercise, and I don't want to get into it all, but it was pagan, and he preached against it. And then there's exposure of unwanted infants. Matter of fact, Rome was, in their legend, founded by two boys that were abandoned to being exposed in the woods, Romulus and Remus, and a she-wolf came by and nursed them, and they supposedly survived, and they founded Rome. That's the legend. But the idea of exposure of unwanted infants in Rome, the mother would bear the child and lay the child at the father's feet. If the father picked up the baby and liked it, thought it looked healthy, thought they could afford it, they would keep the baby. But if he did not pick up the baby, the mother would have to put the baby in a basket and put it out in the woods and expose it to the elements and let the baby die. And there's all these tearful stories of the mothers giving their goodbye wishes to their little babies. Well, as Christianity spread, the mothers that were told to get rid of their baby, they would put the baby in a basket on the doorstep of a Christian couple and knock on the door and then run away and hide and peek to make sure the baby was taken. And that's where you get these stories of a knock on the door of an old couple and they open it and there's a baby in a basket. Who leaves a baby in a basket at the door of a stranger? The Roman women did when their husbands didn't pick up the baby. So this exposure of unwanted infants was their version of abortion. And Nicholas preached against it. Nicholas would have been a pro-life preacher today. And then there's the Arian heresy. The first several centuries of Christianity, they didn't have a New Testament yet. They had different letters and different gospels, but they didn't really have time to argue over doctrine because they would get killed so fast. And it wasn't until Constantine legalized Christianity that you had the first major heresy. It's called Arianism. Bishop Arius said Jesus was a created being, a little less than God, and he writes a catchy song, and the Visigoths, who were immigrants that came into Rome, they converted to Arianism in large numbers, so much that it was splitting the church. And since Constantine had made Christianity the de facto religion of Rome, it's splitting the Roman Empire. And so Constantine orders and pays for all the bishops to come together and settle this thing. And they do. It's called the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. It's the first time that all the Christian leaders got together and they write the Nicene Creed, and the artwork of this Council of Nicaea has the bishops sitting around, and in a pit in the middle is Arius. They excommunicate him. And so Nicholas supposedly was there because Nicaea is not too far from Myra and where he was a bishop. And the story is that Nicholas was so upset at Arius for starting the Arian heresy that he slapped him across the face. So you see some of this early artwork of Nicholas slapping Arius. So jolly old St. Nick had a little temper. You better watch out if he's coming to town. And I was on the internet finding some of these old images of Nicholas, and there's one where it has him, Nico, St. Nicholas, and underneath it says, "I came to give presents to kids and to punch heretics. I just ran out of presents." And anyway, now Nicholas is noted for miracles. And a lot of the early church records were destroyed when those Romans were doing their persecutions. But some of the miracles attributed to Nicholas was a famine, and then a storm, and then he rescued soldiers. So a famine. His area was not having enough food. There wasn't enough rain, wasn't enough crops. People were starving. Well, if you look at a map, the grain was grown in North Africa and shipped across the Mediterranean to Asia Minor and then shipped to Rome. Well, when the ships would stop off at Asia Minor in Myra, Nicholas went down to the docks and talked some of the sailors into unloading grain to feed his starving people. And he promised that God would bless them. And so they leave, they go to Rome with what's left, and when they came back, they reported that what was left in their ship had multiplied. Like the little widow's meal barrel in the story of Elijah, that she had plenty of grain. And then there was a storm. Fishermen and sailors could not get back to the dock, and it looked like they were going to sink. They get Nicholas, he comes down and prays, and the sea becomes calm. Sort of like Jesus calming the sea. And so Nicholas is also considered the patron saint of sailors. So if you've seen pictures of Nicholas, he is often pictured with a boat because he calmed the sea. And then there is his confronting corrupt politicians. So there was a governor who was doing corrupt things and was going to kill some soldiers because they knew about it, and he wanted to cover up his corruption. We hear about today politicians and a body count list and an unusual amount of people that know certain politicians end up dying. And anyway, the story gets to Nicholas, and he goes down to the execution square, busts through the crowd, grabs the sword out of the executioner's hand and throws it down. And then in front of everybody, by the Holy Spirit giving him the word of knowledge, he tells everybody what the corrupt governor was doing in secret. And the governor knew nobody could know the details other than God, and so he repents and he begs Nicholas to pray for him. And so you'll often see early artwork of Nicholas grabbing the sword out of the executioner's hand there. And so here he was, standing up for the Trinity, and he had miracles, and he confronted corrupt politicians. Now, he dies in 343 AD, and then you have Emperor Theodosius in 379 AD. Now, he's a Christian emperor. Theodosius is going to church in Milan, Italy, where the pastor is Bishop Ambrose, St. Ambrose. And at the time, the Greeks are still doing their pagan stuff. And so the Emperor Theodosius orders them to stop, and they won't. So he sends an army over to Greece, and they kill a bunch of people. And the Bishop Ambrose, there's a painting of him rebuking Emperor Theodosius, saying, you're not supposed to spread Christianity by killing people. And but nevertheless, Theodosius was the one who outlawed paganism. He removed pagan temple prostitutes. He ended human sacrifice, blood sacrifice, ended divination, examining animal entrails. He destroyed these pagan temples, and he ended the Olympics because the Olympics were naked. And anyway, and so now I do want to make a comment. In one century, you go from Christians meeting in catacombs, risking their lives every single time they get together. And the Christian experience was small group, because you couldn't be in a big group because you'd be noticed and caught and thrown into the Colosseum. It was a small group religion, very intimate, very personal, and everybody knew somebody that died for their faith. But Constantine legalizes Christianity, and now Christians come out of the catacombs. Constantine is the one who converts the big basilicas into churches. And so now the church experience is in a big marble church. And then you have the Arian heresy, and then a couple of heresies, and then you have these consuls settling them, coming up with really good doctrine, but it was essentially the official state doctrine. And then you have Theodosius, and he's outlawing paganism. So you have pagans flooding into the Christian basilica, saying, okay, whatever the state doctrine is, I'm fine with it. And many of them have not had a heart experience with Jesus, right? And so they need to get saved. And so that's when this pietist movement became such an unusual thing that they, oh, somebody has a real experience with Jesus. Wow, they must be called. You must be special. You better live in a monastery, right? But anyway, now we're up to Emperor Justinian. And he is 483 to 565 AD. He builds the biggest church in the world. It's called the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, named after Constantine. And the church is still there. Muslims just turned it into a mosque, but it's still there. And Justinian builds a cathedral in Myra and names it after Nicholas, right? And so now we go forward in history, and you have the Council of Nicaea, 567 AD, where they make the 12 days between December 25th and January 6th, the 12 days of Christmas. They call them holy days, which we pronounce today holiday. Then in 988 AD, Vladimir the Great of Russia converts to Greek Orthodox Christianity, and he adopts Nicholas as the patron saint of Russia. Now, the first chronicle of Russia in 988 AD is pretty interesting. It's the court records. And Vladimir decides to take all the pagan idols and throw them in the Dnieper River. And then when word gets out that he wants to convert to monotheism, some Jews show up. They were Khazars. They were Jews there in the Caucasus Mountain area. And he listens to them, and then he sort of says, well, let me get this straight. You sinned against your God, and he drove you out of your land. Now, why should I follow you again? And so he does not convert to that. But then Muslims come, and they tell Vladimir about paradise being filled full of virgins that would fulfill all the guy's desires. And it says Vladimir listened intently when they described this because he was fond of women. But then when the Muslims told him that they could no longer drink alcohol, he says, we cannot have this religion because drink is the joy of the Russes, the Russians, right? The vodka and so forth. And anyway, and then some Western European Catholic ambassadors come, but then you have Greek ambassadors. And they tell Vladimir that they speak Greek, the language of the New Testament. Their land is where all seven churches that are mentioned in the book of Revelation were at. They talk about the Apostle Paul being there, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, died over there. And then the ambassadors went into that Hagia Sophia church. It's 165 feet high, 102 foot across dome, 4 acres of gold mosaics. The ambassadors said when they walked in there, they felt like they were walking into heaven. And so Vladimir converts to Greek Orthodox Christianity and adopts Nicholas as the patron saint of Russia. And so that's why you had so many churches and Tsar Nicholas and so forth. And then Islam. And so I wrote a book called What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, A History of Islam in the United States. And the Muslims conquer Arabia. They conquer Jerusalem around 648 AD. The Muslims conquer Syria. People forget Syria was the first country that was completely Christian, evangelized by the Apostle Paul. The name Christian was first used in Syria until Caliph Umar conquered it in 648 AD. And we need to pray for the Syrian Christians today. And then the Muslims conquer into Armenia, which had been a Christian country. It's sort of tied with Syria as to which one was completely Christian first. And then Egypt becomes Christian. Saint Mark that wrote the gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Mark evangelized Egypt until Amir ibn Alas conquers Egypt. And then there used to be 250 Catholic dioceses along North Africa. St. Augustine was from Hippo, today that's Carthage. And the Christians had taught themselves not to get involved, and so it was their version of separation of church and state. And so the Umayyad Muslims conquered it unopposed. And then in the year 711, you had 80,000 Muslims invade Spain. They had Arabian horses and stirrups and scimitar swords, in 10 years conquer all of Spain. And then they were stopped outside of Paris at the Battle of Tours in 732 AD, just 100 years after the death of Muhammad in 632 AD. And so as the Muslims were invading into Greece, they were destroying graves. And why is this a concern? Well, the grave of St. Nicholas, they don't want it destroyed. And so we have to remember in 846 AD, 11,000 Muslim warriors invaded Rome. Saracen pirates invaded Rome, and they trashed the bones of St. Peter and St. Paul. And so after this, Pope Leo IV built a 39-foot wall around the Vatican. And so I've been to Rome, went to school there in college, and there's a bus stop right there at that corner, and I've been there many times. But that was built because of the Muslims coming in. So the fear was they would destroy the grave of St. Nicholas. So in the year 1087, they moved the grave of St. Nicholas over to Italy, a little town called Bari, B-A-R-I. And Pope Urban II dedicates the church, Cattedrale de Niccolò de Bari, the Cathedral of Nicholas of Bari. And so the Pope Urban II, a few years later in 1095 AD, goes to the Council of Clermont and he begs the Christian leaders to send help to the Greeks. They do what's called the First Crusade. And there's 2 centuries of crusades, but the jihadis have had 14 centuries of crusades that are still going on. And so now that Nicholas's remains are in Bari, Italy, Italy likes the gift giving associated with December 6th and St. Nicholas, and it becomes so popular that St. Francis of Assisi, sort of in protest, he starts the creche scene, the nativity scene, the Jesus, Mary, Joseph, donkeys in the manger. And his attitude was that the gift giving's fine, but it's a distraction from the real reason for the season. Jesus, the Son of God, was born in a manger. And so whenever you see a nativity scene, that goes back to St. Francis. And Isaiah, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive, bear a son. He shall be called Emmanuel. Emmanuel means God with us. John 1:14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So Martin Luther starts the Reformation in 1517. And by this time, there's a saint's day for every day of the year. Churches have relics and side altars, and Luther considers this all a distraction from Christ. And so he ends the saints' days in Protestant Europe. But the Germans like the gift giving. So he moves all the gift giving to December 25th and says all gifts come from the Christ child. And the German pronunciation of Christ child is Christkindl. Christ means Christ, kindle means child, like kindergarten, kindercare. And so if you go to Germany in the Catholic areas, they'll, and Lutheran, but they'll have the Christkindl night and they have the Christ child coming. And so Jesus is the one who brings the Christmas presents. And so you'll see like in Mifflinburg, Pennsylvania, they have the Christkindl market, Christ child market. And now an interesting thing is the Christmas tree. Now, the same way that St. Patrick is often pictured with a 3-leaf clover, and that's symbolic of him converting the pagan Druids in Ireland to Christianity, in Germany, you have the Christmas tree. So the story is, same way that Patrick, who was from Britain, went to Ireland, another Briton guy was St. Boniface or Winfrid, and he goes through the woods into Germany, and he chops down Thor's tree. So the Germans worship Thor. China builds the Great Wall of China in the 3rd century and AD, and the Huns cannot attack into China, so they turned west and attacked. A domino effect of the Visigoths and Ostrogoths and Anglo-Saxons, Jutes and Lombards are all displaced, and they're coming across the Roman border, the Franks, and then the Germans. Well, the Germans worship Thor, and that's where you get Thor's Day. And they worship Woden, and that's where you get Woden's Day or Wednesday. And Thor lived in a tree, an oak tree. And so, a little bit of trivia, Quakers refused to say Wednesday and Thursday because they're the names of pagan gods. So the Quakers would say Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, 4th day, and 5th day, instead of saying Wednesday and Thursday. And so St. Boniface, around the same time the Muslims are invading into France and stopped by Charles Martel, St. Boniface is chopping down Thor's tree. And So around Fritzlar, Germany, and Geismar, Germany, you'll have there's even a town with a statue of Nicholas, Boniface, standing on a stump with an axe in his hand. And so the story is that he was chopping the tree, and somebody said, "Stop him!" And somebody else said, "Well, if Thor's really a god, he can protect his own tree." And then a big wind comes and knocks the tree over. And Boniface points to an evergreen tree and says, "Let this be the tree of the Christ child. See how it points toward heaven and its leaves are evergreen, symbolizing everlasting life. And your houses are built of cedar, and let it shelter no deeds of blood." Henry Van Dyke, and you know him from Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee song. He wrote in 1906 the first Christmas tree, and he talks about in the year before, it says the day before Christmas in the year of our Lord, 722, he talks about Boniface chopping down Thor's oak tree, and then he points at an evergreen. He says, "Not a drop of blood shall fall tonight, for this is the night, birth night of Christ, Son of the All-Father, Savior of the world." And that he points to this evergreen. This is a little tree, young child of the forest. It shall be a home tree tonight. It is the wood of peace, for your houses are built of fir. It is the sign of everlasting life. Branches are evergreen. It points toward heaven. Let this be called the tree of the Christ child. Gather about it not with deeds of blood, but with loving acts of kindness. And so there's that statue of Boniface standing on the stump of a big oak tree holding an axe in Fritzlar, Germany. And so again, the same way that you have Patrick trying to communicate to a bunch of illiterate druids the Trinity using a three-leaf clover, you've got Boniface around the same time trying to teach these pagan Germans about the Trinity using the evergreen tree. And now Abraham in the Bible planted a tamarisk tree, which in tamarisk is an evergreen tree. And Tertullian, an early church father, says, "You are the light of the world, a tree evergreen, if you have renounced the heathen temples." And now lights. You have Hanukkah, which goes back to the Maccabees driving the Syrians, Alexander the Great. His empire was divided into four, and his one general, the Seleucids, took Persia, which controlled Syria and Jerusalem, and he's trying to wipe out the Jews, and the Jews drive him out. And then they want to rededicate the temple, and there's only enough oil for one day, but they pour it in and it lasts 8. And so that's where you see, and even Jesus celebrated the Feast of Dedication, or the Festival of Lights, what is today called Hanukkah. And so the thought is maybe Luther saw lights in the window of some Jewish families, we don't know, but he came home and he put lights in the Christmas tree. One story is that he saw the lights twinkling in the sky, and then he put them in his tree and he told the children, "This is like the sky above Bethlehem on the night of Christ's birth." And so you have these early woodcuts of Luther with a tree, with the lights, and one has his family around him and a son holding a crossbow. Better watch out, you could put your eye out with that thing, right? That was the early version of a BB gun, right? Anyway, and now Martin Luther wanted to point back to the Christ child, but now we got England. Henry VIII brings the Reformation, not because he wanted not because he wanted to turn to Christ. He wanted another wife. He ended up having 6 wives. And he brings back an old Roman holiday called Saturnalia. And Saturn is the god of feasting and plenty and merriment. If you saw the Christmas Carol with Charles Dickens, the Spirit of Christmas Present is this guy with a happy party guy with a wreath in his hair and a goblet of wine and robes. And you're looking at him saying, who is he? He sort of looks like Santa, but he also looks like a Roman god. Well, that was Saturn, but they Christianized him, called him Father Christmas. And during Henry's time in England, Christmas became a party time. They had the Lord of Misrule in the Tudor London, and he'd have these banquets, and they'd have people mocking, dress up as the bishop, and Henry VIII would fling sugar plums at people, and Shakespeare wrote the bawdy play, the Twelfth Night, right, the 12th night of Christmas, but it was a bardy, carnivalesque drunken revelry based on this ancient Roman festival of Saturnalia. And so here's even a story, the enchanting history of Mardi Gras, how religious celebration became a party. So do you know that Mardi Gras used to be a religious day? It was the day before Lent when you would fast 40 days before Easter, and now it's a lewd party. Mardi Gras, this article has its origin in Christianity with pre-Lenten period. Over the time, Mardi Gras evolved from a strictly religious celebration to a secular one. Well, guess what? Mardi Gras has a Lord of Misrule, the same way that Henry VIII's party had a Lord of Misrule. And so Henry VIII, they had drinking, dancing, gambling, dice, throwing dice, wassailing, taking drink of booze and throwing the rest on a plant, court jesting, illicit mirth, disorderly laughter, pranks, and boy bishops and mock executions, all kinds of stuff, and nuns escaping convents. And anyway, the Puritans come along and they're strict, and they begin to outlaw Christmas in England. And because it's all pagan. Here's a Puritan ordinance, 1643. Sins of our forefathers have turned this feast of Christ into an extreme forgetfulness of him by giving liberty to carnal and sensual delights. Puritan Cotton Mather said, can you in your conscience think that our Holy Savior is honored by mad mirth, long eating, hard drinking, lewd gaming, rude revelry fit for a mass for a Saturn, a night of Ramadan, so forth? You cannot possibly think so, that the birth of our Savior, which we are a high praise to God, we take time to please the hellish legions and do actions that have more of hell than of heaven in them. And so the Puritans outlaw Shakespeare from mentioning God in his plays, and that's when he writes Midsummer Night's Dream with little fairies. And then in 1644, the Puritans tear down Shakespeare's Globe Theater. Well, guess what? These Puritans come to America, and the captain of the Mayflower, Christopher Jones, writes in the ship's log, he says, at anchor in Plymouth Harbor Christmas Day, but not observed by these colonists, they being opposed to all saints' days, etc. And so he talks about the Pilgrims didn't celebrate Christmas. William Bradford says that another boatload of Pilgrims came over the next year, and he says one more incident rather amusing. On Christmas Day, Governor called the people out to work as usual, but most of the new company excused themselves, said it went against their consciences to work on that day. So the governor told them if they made it a matter of conscience, he would spare them till they became better informed. So he went with the rest and left them. But on returning from work at noon, he found them at play in the street, some pitching the bar, some stool ball and such like sports. So the governor went to them and took away their games and told them that it was against his conscience that they should play and the others work. If they made it a matter of keeping the day a matter of devotion, let them remain in their houses, but there should be no gaming and reveling in the streets. Anyway, the Puritans are strict. They had a fine whosoever shall be found observing any such day as Christmas, either by forbearing, labor, feasting, or any other way, shall pay for each offense a 5-shilling fine. So Pilgrims, Puritans, and most Presbyterians did not celebrate Christmas, but others did. Germans, French, the Welsh, English, and Swedes, and the Dutch. So the same way that a Catholic has a saying, St. Peter's at the gates of heaven, the Dutch do a take on the book of Revelation. The prophecy, Jesus will return at the end of the world to judge the living and the dead riding a white horse. Saints will come back with him riding white horses. St. Nicholas is a saint, so he'll be one of those riding a white horse. But he's so special, he gets to come back once a year for a little mini judgment day, a little checkup on the kids to see who's naughty, see who's nice. So the Dutch have St. Nicholas coming back once a year riding a white horse, dressed as a saint, and he's getting ready to do judgment, right? And so over time, it got embellished. The saints come from heaven, New Jerusalem, well, that turned into the North Pole. And Norway and Finland, they didn't have many horses, so he's riding a reindeer. And then riding a reindeer turned into pulling a sleigh. And then the angels turn into the elves, and the Lamb's Book of Life turns into the book of the naughty and the nice, right? And the little kids being the judge, and here's a little boy, doesn't look too happy. And and the book of Daniel even talks about, I beheld the Ancient of Days, his throne was like the fiery flame, 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. And then you see the book of Revelation, great white throne, him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the sky fled away, and heaven fled away. And he saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and the books were opened. Right? And so then there's the Lamb's Book of Life, and the dead were judged according to the works by them. But anyone who's not found written in the Book of Life was cast into the lake of fire. So thank God you believe in Jesus, your name's in the Lamb's Book of Life. And anyway, time slipping away. So the Book of Works, that's Cain. He was trying to work his way to heaven, but it says, for by the works of the law shall no flesh be saved. And then Abel trusted in the Lamb, and that's us, the Book of Life. believe, Acts 16:31, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you shall be saved in your household. And so the Dutch have St. Nicholas coming once a year for a little mini judgment day. And he has with him a helper. And his helper's name is Zwarte Piet, Black Peter, and he's a Muslim. And the Muslims controlled Spain for 700 years. And they enslaved over 1 million Europeans. Muslims enslaved an estimated 180 million Africans, and they had slave markets in Timbuktu and Khartoum, but they enslaved about 1 million Europeans. And so they would tell these little Dutch kids, if you're good, St. Nicholas will give you a present. If you're naughty, Zwarte Piet will put you in a gunny sack, take you back to Spain, and sell you into Muslim slavery. So often when you tell the little boys that Santa Claus is coming, Santa Claus, they would start crying. I one time did an interview and somebody called in and said he was raised in Holland, and the night before St. Nicholas visited, every little boy would have a pocket knife in their pocket before they'd go to sleep. And I said, why is that? He goes, that's to cut ourselves out of the gunny sack. Anyway, imagine telling your kids that story. Well, the Dutch settled New York, which became New Amsterdam, which became New York. St. Nicholas was the patron saint of sailors, and the Dutch had a global merchant military fleet, and instead of a mermaid on the front, they would often have a St. Nicholas on the front of their ship. And the St. Nicholas is the patron saint of Amsterdam. They have this huge basilica in Amsterdam, the Basilica van de Heilige Nicholas, the Holy Nicholas, St. Nicholas. And so guess what? The Dutch build a church in New Amsterdam, and it was the St. Nicholas Dutch Reformed Church, founded in 1642 in Battery Park, New York. And it went on to become the biggest Protestant church in America. And then the British took over New York, and they moved from Battery Park to another location. It burned in 1741. They rebuilt it. And it was this enormous church there at Fifth Avenue, right on Fifth Avenue in New York and 4th Street. And even Teddy Roosevelt attended there. But as the city became more of a financial district, people moved out, and the church elders had some financial mismanagement, and they sold the building to Sinclair Oil Company, who tore it down and built the Sinclair Oil Building. That's sad. Anyway, so Nicholas in New York, he's still a saint, and he's dressed as a bishop, but somebody changed his clothes, and that person was Washington Irving. And he's in New York. He writes Rip Van Winkle, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and he writes in 1809, Dietrich Knickerbocker's History of New York from the beginning of the New World to the end of the Dutch dynasty. The Knickerbocker was a made-up name, but it caught on so much that today you have the New York Knicks, Knickerbockers. And in his book, he describes the Dutch St. Nicholas visiting, riding over the housetops, drawing forth magnificent presents, dropping down the chimneys of his favorites. Visits once a year, rattles down the chimney, confining his presents to children, stockings hung by the morning, mysteriously filled. But he changes the outfit from a bishop to a typical Dutch outfit of stocking hat, pair of trunk hose, large pipe, leather belt. But he still has him laying his finger inside his nose, gave a significant look, then mounting his wagon, he returns over the treetops, disappears. And so you have these Dutch in New York. But then in New York, 1823, Clement Moore. He's a Hebrew professor, Anglican, and he writes a poem for his children. By the way, the Clement Moore's family donated the land for a seminary, and there's a park at 10th Avenue and 22nd Street, the Clement Moore Park. And the book, the poem was written, A Visit from St. Nicholas, and everyone has the first part of it memorized. "'Twas night for Christmas, all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. Stockings were hung by the chimney with care in hopes that St. Nicholas would soon be there." He's still called St. Nicholas. "When what to my wondering eye should appear, a miniature sleigh, a tiny reindeer, a little old driver, lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. He's dressed with fur, head to his foot, so he's not dressed as a bishop. Clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot, bundle of toys flung on his back, looked like a peddler opening his pack, eyes how they twinkle, dimples how merry, cheeks like roses, nose like a cherry, droll little mouth, they're up like a bow, beard of his chin white as snow, stump of a pipe he'll tighten his teeth, smoking encircled his head like a wreath." It's like, when did he take up tobacco? Right? Tobacco came from the American Indians. And broad face, round belly, shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly, chubby, plump, right, jolly old elf, laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. So now he's shrunk, and but he goes back up through the chimney and so forth. Thomas Nast is an illustrator for Harper's Weekly magazine during the Civil War. You know Thomas Nast because he invented the Republican elephant and Democrat mule for his political cartoons. Well, Thomas Nast did a cover of Harper's Weekly of St. Nicholas talking to the Union troops, little boys playing with toys. This was a political jab at the South to say St. Nicholas is associated with the North, right? The North Pole. And then he does a series in color, and the first time the fur is red. And then Quaker Oats, Man and Aunt Jemima were designed by Haddon Sundblom. He's an artist. And Haddon Sundblom was hired by Coca-Cola to draw a painting of St. Nicholas drinking Coke. For 33 years, he did one every year, and Coca-Cola pioneered mass marketing. And so this is the image that got spread around the world. He's full grown now. He's no longer a chubby, plump, bright, jolly old elf. He's like a huggable grandfather, a lovable, rosy cheeks and everything. And so you see a lot of this fancy artwork, and then there's even pictures of him smoking Lucky Strikes and Camel tobacco, and it's like, well, I guess they're taking smoking the pipe to another level there. But anyway, if we peel back the layers, we go from Santa Claus to the Sinterklaas, the Dutch pronunciation of St. Nicholas, to the real guy who was a godly man who lived there in Asia Minor. And so St. Nicholas was a Christian, the real guy. He loved Jesus enough to go into the ministry. He was persecuted and imprisoned for his faith. He defended the doctrine of the Trinity, Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Miracles are attributed to him, and he confronted corrupt politicians. And but we mostly remember St. Nicholas because he was generous and gave to the poor, but he gave anonymously because he wanted the glory to go to God and not to himself. For God so loved the world that he gave. He gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever shall believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life. And again, the book that I wrote is called There Really Is a Santa Claus, The History of St. Nicholas and Christmas Holiday Traditions. And I don't have time to get into it all, but the Hubble telescope years ago was focused on the sky, a little spot, and when they zoomed in, they saw that in the size of a grain of sand was 10,000 galaxies, called the Hubble Ultra Deep Space Field, and God made it all, and he made you. Why would he make you? What could you possibly offer a God that's that powerful? Nothing, except maybe something. You can love God back. But God has to judge you if you sin. Well, the Lamb takes the judgment in your place. So the Lamb is God's way to love you without having to judge you. Well, with that, I'm going to let you know that you can get a free book. And it's called How to Stay Positive in a Negative World by Andrew Womack. And it's a special gift to you. So all you have to do is call in or visit the website, and you can get this tremendous book, How to Stay Positive in a Negative World. And you can be inspired by faith, inspired by the gospel, inspired by the great insights that Andrew continually gives us. And just want to, again, wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holy Days this Christmas. And that God loves you, and he's got a great plan for your life, and it all begins today.